So you went from Thailand to Mongolia, was that right? Straight away, would you come back or?
I came back, I was going to go straight away and I realized I would have died trying. But pretty much I was looking at a country that I was completely unfamiliar with. I was looking at that next big thing, extreme, bigger than the whole Vietnam site, anything that I had done. And I wanted it to be a walk purely because when you're cycling, you are relatively safe. You're on a road, you're going to come across people. If there's people, there's food. If there's food, there's water. Whereas, by foot, you walk where vehicles and bicycles can't go. And you're sort of relying solely on yourself to survive. And I like that. And as you say, I've had no military background in terms of survival. So everything that I've learned has been from the locals. And I like the idea of learning from the Mongolian locals in preparation before I actually attempt to walk across the country. Again, I was 22 and I was thinking maybe walk 100 miles in the Gobi Desert or 200 miles until I went full whack and I thought I'm going to walk the entire length. I didn't know it was a world record. As far as I was concerned, many people had done it before. And so my reasoning was to look for those people who have done it before and ask them for help or advice. And then, I started to research extensively and, I was shouting on Facebook, people who know people in Mongolia and, the team started to grow. I had a team up back in the UK then, and there was the strongest logistical team I could find in Mongolia. And with all our extensive research, if you like, we couldn't find any evidence to suggest that Mongolia had been walked solo and unsupported. But we did find someone who had attempted, but was evacuated 3 times just after the halfway point. And so, this piqued my adrenaline. I was like, okay, maybe I can't do this. This sounds a lot more dangerous than I anticipated. I reached out to the guy and I pretty much asked what the dangers are. And he got back with this intimidating list. Look, you need to look out for the grey wolves, the stagnant water, the snow blizzards, the sandstorms, the drunken nomadic drifters, the locked wells. And the list went on and on. And I freaked myself out. I looked into this guy and realized that he was a Navy soldier, a desert explorer. He's crossed the Sahara Desert, and I'm just a 22-year-old beach bum, if you like. And I'm like, what chance do I have? And I was terrified. I pretty much ruled out Mongolia and got the European map out and started to look at a safer country in Europe until I realized, just because no one's found a way to do something doesn't mean it can't be done. If I focused in my energy, if I planned this properly, unlike the Vietnam cycle, and had the right team in terms of the fixers on the ground who was able to tell me, what water wells are along the way, then maybe I could do this. And so I knew that I couldn't go from Thailand straight to Mongolia. I needed to come back. So I moved back into my parents' place. I didn't have any money, not even enough money for a gym membership. So my uncle dropped me off a tractor tire. I was just training in my back garden really with that tractor tire, building up my durability, inner core strength, all of that. Managed to get a small amount of funding. I say small amount of funding, a few grand to take on a world first. Probably one of the cheapest world firsts ever. and off I went with a trailer that was built in a family friend's back garden. And that was it. I was about to walk 1,500 miles completely solo, completely unsupported, with dodgy evacuation because I couldn't afford no helicopter pickup like the previous guy. The trailer weighed 18 stone or 120 kilograms, which is pretty much the same weight as a heavyweight world boxer. It would be 3 weeks over the Altai Mountains, 5 weeks across the Gobi Desert, and 3 weeks up through the Mongolian steppe. I was terrified. I had a lot of doubt. I had a lot of fear. I'm not going to act like I'm some hero and like, yeah, I was ready for it. I was bricking it, in all fairness. I was sort of building up each scenario in my head, what could go wrong, and if there's going to be wolves, expect to be attacked. If there's going to be blizzards, expect them to be the biggest, but not because I wanted to face the biggest, but it's almost 70% mindset and 30% physical. I was building up the hype and trying to really terrify myself that if worst case scenario was to happen when I'm out there, at least it comes as something that I anticipated and visualized, and it doesn't pop up as a shock. Because when you're shocked, that's when you tend to panic and screw up. And off I went. with this trailer, with this wheel trailer, and yeah, it commenced. It took 70. It was anticipated to take 100 days. It took 78 days. Almost lost my life during the process, but completed that particular journey, a wild journey.
Oh, jeez, I mean, it sounds crazy, mental, you absurd, to even attempt something like that, But
Yeah.
what was your biggest sort of challenge then? When you were there, what was it? The temperature? Was it the the animals? Was it the even eating the food? I know it sounds really daft, but you can eat the wrong
Yeah.
food, and you can get
Yeah.
severe diarrhea, and you can probably kill. You can kill.
Yeah,
What's the
100%. No, yeah, you're right. You're right. And I did suffer, unfortunately, too many times with diarrhea.
Yeah.
And that's because I went through points of starvation. And then I'd come across a local and I'd drink like 3 literal little, almost like little tubs, little buckets of yogurt. And my body just couldn't handle that. I took about 5.5, 6 weeks worth of ration packs as well, all carried on that trailer. But some of the biggest dangers were definitely the wolves, the grey wolves in the Altai Mountains. The temperatures dropped to about minus 15 degrees Celsius. I was over 3,000 meters altitude. There were snow blizzards, were quite disorientating. But probably the biggest danger, or well, definitely the biggest danger was, after a certain amount of weeks, I think because I was in the Altai Mountains, the feeling, when it's cold, you don't actually feel like drinking cold water. You feel hydrated almost. It's scary. I wasn't drinking enough water. And by the time I came to enter the desert, I was probably already dehydrated without realizing. And then the heat of that Gobi Desert, the weeks went by and I still wasn't taking in enough water because effectively I had to ration my water because I was unsure whether the next well was locked dry or if it was stagnant water or whatnot. And so I had to try to ration the water as much as I could in this big 20-litre water container. And as I was going, I started to get more delirious. I was like, still trying to hold back on the water. And by the time I came to a well, that was an unconfirmed water source, it was dry. And so I now had to make sure that this sort of last remaining dribbles of water lasted me to the next water source, which I knew was confirmed. But as you know, it was difficult to ration because I was hallucinating, I was delirious, I was going from heat exhaustion to heat stroke, which is usually fatal. I was pulling this 18-stone trailer through soft sand at this point, so the thin wheels were sinking in the soft sand. So I was leaning forward like 90 degrees with my walking poles, trying to rip this. And I was already really skinny and weak after pulling the trailer up and over the Altai Mountains. And I was just slipping into a really bad and dark place. I could almost feel my organs drying up. I couldn't escape the burning of the sun. It was plus 40 degrees Celsius. There was no breeze. There was no shade or shelter. The only shelter that I could find actually was underneath my trailer. And so I found more often than not, I would hide under my trailer and I wouldn't come back out for a good hour or so. And it was at that point I realized that if I don't keep getting up and pushing on, I'm going to die out here in the Gobi Desert. I was a little bit too reckless. I pushed on that I had missed the point of pickup. So I was now at my worst point. I was still 4 whole walking days away from my next community. Doesn't sound like a lot for walking days, but when you're already slowly dying, that's a heck of a amount of time and distance. And if I called my agent in the capital, I would need to allow him at least 3 to 4 days to get to me, and then another day or 2 to get me out. So it was kind of 4 days of me walking there, or 6 days of me sort of hanging around. And I just did not believe that I could survive 6 days. And so my only option was to walk myself out of this, otherwise I would die. And I've always believed in aspects like the law of attraction, visualization. I was trying my best to visualize that water source 4 days, but I just couldn't, man. I was just in pure agony. So what I did is, what I learned here in Wales was to break my goals down. Like I said at the start of this podcast, when I was learning or trying to save up to travel, and I was breaking down the little goals of what would get me there. What I decided is to focus on 100 meters. I could see 100 meters, so there was no reason why I couldn't get up from under my trailer, allow myself no more than 5 minutes rest time, and push on for 100 meters before resting for another 5 minutes. And by breaking it down to 100-meter walking, 5-minute resting, as slow and as painful as it was, I was making steady progress, and I did just about make it. to that community. My urine was black. I was in a bad way. It took me over a week to recover. But I did recover, and you know, I made it out with my life and was able to then push on and complete that journey. So I'd say the Gobi Desert was definitely there was lots of tough aspects, but the Gobi was serious, you know, and that was the point. I knew that it would be the point between failing or succeeding that went from that to a point of living or dying, and it just stakes were risen. And, but yeah, we made that.
And then, so you did something, so I wouldn't say it was easy then, it was probably the most extreme. And then you went and did Madagascar, which is probably flipping it on its head, but even more extreme because you got the uncertainty of the civil war that was going on or starting. And then I know, I haven't been to Madagascar, I've been to Mauritius, but it's nothing like, but I know Madagascar is very, very, people just think it's all beaches. It's not. It's on, you know, in a very inhospitable place, you know, and it's
oh man, it is wild. I think when I talk about Mongolia and Madagascar, especially I found during like the UK tours or whatnot, people put Mongolia above Madagascar as the tougher challenge. But what they don't realize when you put it into perspective, so Madagascar was only 100 miles longer than Mongolia in terms of the route that I took. So there was only a 100-mile distance, but Madagascar being slightly longer, but it took almost double the duration. It didn't take 78 days like Mongolia, it took 155 days. And I think that just puts it into perspective. And with Madagascar, you know, the reason why I chose that island was the Mongolian locals were just so incredible. But I went over 8 days quite often without seeing any locals. But when I came across them, they were always the biggest highlight. So I thought on my next journey, I want to take on a journey where I'm coming across more locals, because that's what I love just meeting new people. For me, it's not about one man and his mission. It's about the country, the culture, you know, not about my opinion of the country, but getting their thoughts and feelings and their way of life. You know, I just love that. And that's how it all started at age 19 with the Vietnam cycle, just immersing myself in with the local way of life. But not only that, it was the fact that 80% of all plant life and wildlife in Madagascar is found nowhere else in the world. And so that biodiversity, just the uniqueness of that island, was shocking. You know, when I found that out, I was like, wow, you know, this is going to be a heck of a journey. And the journey was to walk from the most southern tip via the interior mountainous ridge, summiting the 8 highest mountains along the way, all the way to the most northern point. It was 1,600 miles, 155 days. With this, I was able to take a quick recce out to meet my logistics team who was going to help me with the planning. And they pretty much led, you know, Discovery Channel, BBC, Nat Geo. So he's pretty much like the face of adventure out there. And it was him that put for me, I was going to just walk the island, maybe the coast. It didn't matter as long as I went from south to north. It was actually Giles, my logistics manager, that said, you know, there's a mountain range that lies almost the entire length of the island, and it's right in the middle. He said it's harder, it's wild. He says you've got people living up in tribes that have never seen white man before. There's not enough food. There's not a lot of food. There's not many communities, and the weather is much harsher. And it's constantly like that. And he says, and no one's ever done it. And I knew the second he said, or he threw that my way, it slipped into my mind. And I was like, oh, what have you done? That's what I'm going to do. so I did. And yeah, like just briefing on some of the challenges with Madagascar. You mentioned like the civil unrest down south. So, you know, straight away, it was either, you know, do I hide in the jungle away from the military? But then I realized that there's bandits hiding in the jungle from the military, and we didn't know whether we wanted to come across the corrupt bandits or the corrupt military. And we decided let's not come across the bandits. So we left it. It was proper like Rambo stuff. It was pretty intense. And we came out of the jungle, and we were, you know, greeted by the military, guns pointing at us. Sort of, they were drunk. One of the shots was slipping off his shoulder. He was catching it by the trigger with the barrel pointing at mine and my guide's head. And we were like, oh my God, what's going on? You know, we got out of that scenario. Luckily, we did have to avoid the bandits. I contracted the deadliest strain of malaria and had to walk with malaria for about 4 days. until I reached a city. And then a doctor came out and I reached her. She said it was only a few hours before potentially slipping into a coma. So that was a close call. It took me about a week or so to try to recover from that. I lost about 13, 14 kilograms in weight. And I was only 1 month into a 5-month journey, but I pushed on. There was crocodile infested rivers that we'd have to cross, often building rafts using natural resources. I was bitten by spiders. There were the leeches that I had to ply off my body every night and flick them out of the tent because you're sort of hacking through the jungle. And there was the jungles where it was hunting and gathering, you know. On a good day, we would walk 14 to 16 hours and maybe we would be lucky to cover 4 miles on a good day. And so it was really demoralizing, you know, machete in hand, sort of opening a path. But again, it was amazing. We were coming across incredible wildlife. There was lemurs chilling above our camp, you know, trying to get the smoke from the fire to keep warm. We came across locals who hadn't ever seen a white person before, but had heard rumors because when the French used to occupy the country over 60 years ago, they were quite brutal. So their grandparents had passed on these awful stories. So now they're seeing white men again. And they just freak, and so it's almost like they don't realize things have changed, and they even run from the locals from the coast if they were to venture, which they just don't anymore. It's crazy. So one community we rocked up to, we were looking for food and we were going to ask them for directions, but they had obviously seen us before we had seen them, and they had completely abandoned their village. There was nothing but chickens in the mud huts with smoke still coming out the windows, and they weren't coming back until we left, unfortunately. We came across villages that were still even suffering with the bubonic plague. It was crazy. It was crazy, but I never had that. I never had Madagascar down as that. I thought maybe the middle of the Amazon or Papua New Guinea, you know, but I never knew Madagascar would be like that. But it was incredible. It was incredible. And of course, we'll get to the story about Gertrude, the little white cockerel.